Spectator subscription is now better value than ever before. As a new subscriber joining today, you'll pay just £1 a week for unlimited online and app access in your first year. To subscribe today, go to spectator.co.uk/TV offer. And finally, has the right gone too far in the culture wars? The Spectator's associate editor Douglas Murray says that perhaps it isn't wise to use the left's tactics. To explain, Douglas joins me now. Douglas, great to see you on Spectator TV. You write in your column for the magazine this week about how the right is retaliating against the culture wars in the United States. Tell us about it.
Yes, well, as I mentioned in the piece, there's been an inevitable backlash brewing for some years. The left has been able for years to accuse people of racism, homophobia, misogyny, and much more with absolute impunity. You don't have to back up the claims. You don't have to prove it. People say, well, if it's not true, then why not sue? And the answer is, how can you sue and end up in a court of law over somebody's claim on Twitter? Particularly if you're just a private individual. So this has been going on for years. We've all known it. We've all seen it as it's been brewing. And I've always said it's inevitable that at some point people would find an accusation to level back. And that's now arrived. It's arrived in the US in the form of the term groomer. Some people may not be familiar with this. Not everyone follows the online and offline culture wars that closely. But groomer is a very interesting accusation that the right has started to play back. And it's, as I say in the piece, it's got some sense to it, which is the only thing that our society actually does abhor even more than racism is child abuse. So leveling child abuse accusations at somebody is a good way, as it were, to hit somebody hard and low. And in the last few months in particular, segments of the American right have realized that this is a very pertinent accusation and one which they can use back at portions of the left. Now, how did this come about? I trace it, among other things, to a strange corner of the culture war, which you know, Kate, which happened about a year ago, which was a row about something called Drag Queen Story Hour. And Drag Queen Story Hour was the discovery that some school children were being read stories in a library by a drag queen. It became a huge sort of culture war issue, and segments of the right, particularly the religious right, said this is basically Sodom and Gomorrah, this is Babylon, and much more. But then people started to keep an eye on, among other things, the way in which Pride Month and other segments of the what's now become LGBTQIA plus agenda started to move into the mainstream. So, for instance, parents bringing their children to Pride events, which in my view, in many cases, is just totally inappropriate. Starting to see children at events they shouldn't be at. The right started to say things like, this is a groomer event. It happened with, for instance, some teaching in schools about gender fluidity, about 100 genders and all this sort of thing. Stonewall, the British charity, which I think is a lamentable organization now, just last week put out a tweet saying that 2-year-olds should know their gender identity. And basically segments of the right have realized not just that there is something crazy about assuming that even a 2-year-old can say, I'm gender non-conforming, or I'm a lesbian, or I'm gay, or I'm trans, or anything else. What do you know at 2, for God's sake? Not just that this is crazy to be teaching children this, but that a shortcut to stopping it is to level this accusation. Groomer.
Douglas, the way that you talk about OK groomer in the piece suggests that you're not terribly impressed with the use of the term. As you just pointed out there might be examples that understandably deeply frustrate or worry sensible people, but that the accusation itself is just making the culture wars worse, and it's taking us to a place in our conversations where we cannot have any kind of conversation back and forth that doesn't result in the nastiest, most ugly accusations going back and forth.
That's right. I do actually fear that. I think one of the questions which I've written about in the magazine in the past of recent years has been, how do you respond to an accusation which is not disprovable. And the accusation of racism is not disprovable. I mean, a person can't get it off them if they're accused of it. They can say, well, I've got black friends, or I'm not racist, or I'm married to a black woman, or whatever they say, they still can't get it off them. Even people who are black can't get the accusation of racism off them. And this is very, it causes an enormous amount of anger and frustration to people. Well, I think that groomer is a sort of accusation back at a similar level. And I do worry about the results of it. I worry about the results of it, not least because you can see a situation where two political sides both throw the nastiest, dirtiest accusations against each other, and you sort of can't get them off. The second reason I worry about it is that I do think that there's going to be and I mentioned this in the piece, the portions of, the sort of what's called the LGBTQIA plus world are going to get caught up in this. They just already are. And a lot of gay people who don't want anything to do with the gender nonsense, don't want anything to do with, drag queen strippers and children being present, don't want anything to do with any of this, are going to get caught up in it. So that's the second reason. But a third reason is just really about a commitment to truth, which is that you always have that option. I actually wrote about this last week in the magazine. You always have that option, don't you, in any political discussion of, will I or will I not abandon my commitment to truth? Will I just grab the nearest stick and just beat my opponent with it? Or will I actually resist that urge? And as I've written in the magazine before, in American politics today, a very distinct urge is not just to defeat your opponent, but to hurt them, to really hurt them. So one of the things about the Donald Trump phenomenon is seizing Donald Trump as a weapon to hurt your opponents. The Democrats do that the other way around as well. So all sides are guilty of it. But there's always this moment of, should I do that? Ought I to do that? And I am, as you say, Kate, I am concerned about it because I do think that although there are occasions where you can say, actually, this is deeply inappropriate for children. For instance, there are some teachers that are being captured on things like libs of TikTok, saying things that they teach to their class that are completely inappropriate, which actually could fall into the category of being groomer-like behavior. So I'm not saying that this doesn't exist at all. I think that it's a specific accusation, like the accusation of racism, that should be reserved for specific justifiable occasions. What I worry about is a decision by, as I say, people who want to win a culture war to say, actually, we're going to give up on that. We're just going to level it as hard and often as we can, and that'll show them.
And Douglas, another point you quite thoughtfully make, I think, in your piece is that this seems to be blown up from a storm in the teacup, that Drag Queen Story Hour was not happening in every school across the United States. And actually, as you point out in the magazine, there's something quite lovely and nice in many circumstances about drag queens and their performances. And
pantomime.
Absolutely. Well, sure. I mean, that's one very family-friendly example. But that, if we wrap this all up together, we're actually in danger of taking what, again, most nice, sensible people can judge for themselves as appropriate or not appropriate for children. And we're just putting disgusting labels on it. And that's wrong, too. I mean, that's the antithesis of being progressive. And I think on the right and the left, you can be progressive. You can be open-minded. And we're basically just trying to lump it all in together and shut it all down for the sake, as you say, of beating the other side up.
Yeah, well, I'm not particularly interested in being progressive myself.
Fair enough. To each their own. But the general point here just being that, we've come a long way as a society when it comes to accepting other people's sexual orientations and being open-minded to adults doing, what it is that they want to do as long as you're not harming anybody else. And we are in danger of taking what is objectively bad behavior, but often very specific and very narrow, and just trying to put labels on everything that it doesn't need a label. We don't need to get involved.
Well, yeah, what I'd say is that what's actually going on is it's classic in-group, out-group behavior. An out-group discovers an in-group behavior and worries about it. There's a combination of that, which, as I say, the internet is particularly good and useful for as a tool. And the second thing is the undoubted example of that does exist, particularly in America, of children being subjected to things that they just shouldn't be subjected to. They shouldn't be made aware of. They're far too young. It's ridiculous. There's always a worry about children and the sexualization of children. It's a completely legitimate and understandable fear. It's a fear all parents have. It's a fear that society should have. Are we sexualizing children too young? That's an absolutely legitimate fear of the society. And so when things blow up around children, it's completely understandable. And there should be a debate about what is taught in schools. There should be a debate about inappropriate things shown to children. And every parent knows this, and every school should know this, and schools should be responsive to parent fears. But I do think that there is a specific corner of this which is potentially highly inflammatory. And if I can just say so quickly, one example of how inflammatory it is that Twitter, which is effectively, as much as we might resist the de facto town square, Twitter has banned the use of the word groomer on the platform now. And that's very interesting because this speaks also to this pent-up anger that is brewing on elements of the right. Twitter has not banned the use of the left's favourite cudgels. It has not said, any Labour MP who accuses Boris Johnson of racism is going to have their tweet taken down. It doesn't say that. No. Still allows the false accusations that can be levelled by the left, primarily by the left, to be allowed, whilst trying to silence the false accusations, mainly false accusations made by people on the right. That's an example of the exacerbation of a problem that I think we're going to see more of. I'd like to think that through very delicate issues like this, issues of sexuality, particularly issues around children, I'd like to think that our societies could have these arguments out sensibly, reasonably, and with due concern for the health and well-being of children. I would think that the least likely way to have that debate is to accuse any and all opponents of being child abusers. But that's where we are. And if you want to, as I say in the piece, if you want to see a little glimpse into the 2020s political debate, you can see an unending war where two sides both level knowingly false accusations against the other.
Douglas, I really despair because I feel like if the right and the Republican Party institutionally goes down this road of trying to match the left, punch for punch on the culture war, it's going to undermine other fundamental values it has. I remember Ron DeSantis not so long ago, in response to Drag Queen Hour, talking about how he was considering getting social services involved if there were any evidence that a parent were to introduce their child to a drag queen or take their kid to a drag queen show. Now, you and I might have opinions, everybody will have opinions about what is appropriate at certain ages, and we should be able to have that discussion. But I was quite shocked to see a Republican governor talking about taking one's child away from them. I mean, we are talking about like the most core, fundamental, frankly, American values about family and your children, and that parents come first, not the state. And, we have to be able to have these conversations without trying to use the tools of the state to attack our opponents. And personally, I think this is an element of the Trump era that has come to dominate the Republican Party, that actually you play as dirty as your opponent and you use the tools at your disposal. And I lament it. I'd be interested on your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I think DeSantis was specifically referring to, some videos that emerged of children being taken to like strip shows, basically, where they're being encouraged to put money into the pants of a drag queen stripper, and that's the sort of thing that quite understandably enrages a lot of people. People are saying, like, what are they doing there? Why would the parents be taking them to this? And again, I'm sorry to return to it, but again, the whole gay world is going to get caught up in this if no kind of boundaries whatsoever are exercised. But so DeSantis, if I remember rightly, was responding to videos like that. But you're right, Kate, that a normal conservative response would have been, look, we will advise parents not to be so irresponsible as to take children to such a thing. We will, of course, expect that schools wouldn't knowingly put children through any such thing. But no, I mean, you wouldn't intervene at the level of social services. But you're right, Kate. This is a discovery of parts of the American right recently, which is that they can use the tools back at their opponents that their opponents have basically used against them. And that includes, using the tools of the state and much more. This is going to get very ugly. And as I say, I mean, a very delicate social issues need to be dealt with, basically very fine tuning. Parents have to be encouraged to good behavior. They shouldn't be browbeaten into it. They certainly shouldn't be threatened by the state into it. And everyone is going to have to kind of cool it a bit, I think. But why would you cool it if you've just discovered a cudgel so incredibly effective? Why would you cool it when you're standing over your opponent with a cudgel that you've long wished to wield?
Douglas, my last question to you is actually about the start of your piece for the magazine this week, to talk about the culture war a bit more generally. You start by writing about a billboard in Southwark in London, which has written on it, "Hey, straight white men, pass the power." Now, Southwark is one of the most deprived local authorities in the country. And the question that immediately pops into my head is, what is being achieved with that poster? Can the left not see the extent to which that alienates people? And, to expand this, can the right and the left not at this point see the extent to which just normal people who perhaps aren't even that political look at these crazy accusations on both sides and think to themselves, I want nothing to do with that? They're not going to open their mind. They're not going to learn any lessons from these accusations.
No, this billboard in Southwark is a pure provocation. It's by a black artist from Marseille. It's obviously approved by the local authorities. You can't put up posters and public works billboards and things without going through approval processes. As I say, I think that if a billboard said, "Hey, black guys, give us your rights," or "Oi, gays, hand over the cash,"
no one would like that.
No one would like it. Everybody would condemn it. Everyone would say it was racist. And so far as I can see, apart from me, nobody has noticed this or bothered about a sign in the public square that just insults straight white men and accuses them of being powerful. And as you say, Kate, I mean, imagine being an ordinary straight white male in Southwark and being told, on top of everything else, on top of all the other sufferings, deprivations, unknown tragedies you've gone through in your life, you're powerful, you've got power, and you've got to hand it over at a point of a kind of threat. What is achieved by this? Only one thing, which is a digging in of a feeling of resentment. The Mayor of London, Southwark Council, everyone else who approves this kind of behaviour, this kind of provocation, should really be asked to rethink this. Why does it make sense to keep insulting majority populations? Most people in Britain are white. Most people are heterosexual. Half the population is male. Why the hell would you do this other than to just hurt people? And I'm afraid the answer is there's no other reason. It's just that.